Hey all, my apology for this late. I'm working in different time zone, so I just slipped the time. Sorry for that.
No worries. So how about it would be good if you could share the ownership of the meeting with some.
Yeah, we need to move it to sig-scheduling because it was in my personal account. So I will work with the sig-scheduling to move it to their ownership. Sorry for that. All right. So here is the agenda. Let me share the agenda with you.
Okay.
Or if you, Matt, please, if you can share with from your side, and I will transfer the ownership for this meeting. So
Give
you
me a
can,
second.
yeah.
All right, can you see that? I never know. Okay, perfect. All right, so let's start with the first item on the agenda. So Anthony.
As discussed during WAS Summit, during which I haven't, part of which I haven't been, but as it was aligned on, we'll be going forward with a cap that will introduce some kind of a hierarchy or like cover the gaps that are necessary in workload-aware scheduling to express some kind of hierarchical scheduling constraints. And by hierarchical constraints or like requirements, I mean like multi-level topology-aware scheduling or like sophisticated gang scheduling policies, like a group of gangs, or also like more complex preemption policies. This should cover the user journeys that we have identified so far for leader worker set and job set. And it should also leave the door open for further integration with disaggregated set that was CAP for which was recently open in the leader worker set repository. And the current naming that we aligned on is Composite Podgroup API. We won't be we were discussing that internally at Google, but we're open to any other name suggestions for that. The current vision of the API is that we'll basically introduce a new API type called Composite Podgroup API, which will be a parent of a set or like set of heterogeneous composite pod groups or a set of some pod groups, basically. So this way we are able to express this whole like workload that we want to schedule as a tree. And because of that, it will be able to like it will facilitate expressing like topology constraints. Like, for instance, I want my workload to run in some zone, And those parts of workloads, we want to have them being run in the same rack, and those subgroups we want to be scheduled on the same host, stuff like that. And yeah, like to sum up, I'll be targeting sharing maybe not a full-fledged, but cap draft this week. And I'll make sure to link it in this document and also on Slack on sig-scheduling probably and workload-aware scheduling channels. And I guess that's it from my side.
All right, cool. Thank you, Anthony. If we don't have any questions, then we can move to the next topic. Maciej.
Yeah, so last week I shared on the scheduling or workload-aware scheduling chat the doc to the which describes how we can integrate the topology-aware scheduling with the workload-aware preemption in the next release. There are like two main options in the doc, but given the comments that I received during the weekend, I think I will promote comments from Wojtek to a third option, and I will rephrase the comparison at the end to have them in tabular format. So feel free to take a look to comment right now, but this will be evolving based on the comments, and this is in progress. So like at the brainstorming phase, so all the comments are welcome.
Yeah, and I would add that it would be good for each of you to familiarize, because I think we don't have a clear winning option here. I think even like among those with whom I was discussing that, I don't think we are even like aligned. So I think like the more voices and the more criteria we can figure out to like, I think I would like to focus the comparison on like specific list of criteria, which once you magic create the table, like I can probably add some of my suggestions, but we need to agree on the criteria, because that will be like critical for for the option choice.
Okay, yeah, for sure. I think the biggest problem we have is that we do not have an easy way to compare the performance of both, as we do not have even with proof of concepts of both options, we would not be able to compare them because we do not have any framework for that right now. But we can do like theoretical analysis of the complexities of both. So hopefully this will be enough.
So I think we will have a week to review this document, and if anyone has any comment, they can apply to it. Otherwise, next week we can confirm whatever we have and have some decisions related to that. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, I hope one
Perfect.
week will be enough.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, I will catch up on that, and Maciej, you can start with the next item.
Yeah, the next item is also a brainstorming on how we can achieve the min count mutability. That is one of the that we think that is one of the beta blockers for 137 of the Polygroup API. I think here what we really care about is the use cases from the people that really need this, or that see how this can be useful for controllers, because I do not have that much experience with the batch workloads. So yeah, I came up with some possible use cases, but it would be best to have some comments from people that are actually actively working with things like leader worker set or jobs or things like that. So yeah, I think we can have similar approaches to the topology-aware scheduling and doc. So all the comments are welcome. I think here we are pretty sure that we want to support the min count mutability, but we are gathering the evidence for so. And I think also the question is whether we are going to support it by with atomic upscales or without. But I think this will be mainly on the side of the controllers, whether you upscale the min count as you upscale the size of the workload, or do you just upscale the size of the workload and leave the min count as is? Because this changes how you, whether the upscale will happen all at once or whether the pods can be admitted one by one for the upscale.
So Kevin has a question, right?
Yeah, I guess I'm curious on what more do you need from the controller side? Like, I feel like we've kind of rehashed this one quite a bit. I looked at this doc and I don't really see anything.
I mean, that's also a good input that we are not missing anything. So,
I mean, I guess on leader workers that obviously I don't even know. I think I put a comment that I'm not even sure if we're able to solve leader worker set mutability without the pod subgroup.
Kevin, could you explain why? Like for the simple leader, or is it about like leader and?
Well, like how do you, yeah, I mean, I don't actually know exactly. I wasn't involved in those discussions, but I mean, I imagine with the pod subgroup, maybe you want to scale like the workers instead of the full like leader worker set, and I don't necessarily know.
I mean, right now, if I understand correctly, I mean, this is what I tried on my cluster, and you can scale the leader worker set, the size of group. So, and you do not have to say whether you are scaling the leader of the group or workers of the group. So basically you have only one field for the size, right, of a single group or replica or the naming.
Like, while eventually it would be nice to have like pod group for basically homogeneous pod groups, right? So separate pod group for leader, separate for workers. I guess it doesn't really prevent us now from implementing something that should work reasonably well with single pod group for LWS replica, right? And then scaling is basically exactly the same as for any other controller. You're updating the min count and updating the size in the LWS.
I mean, it's a question whether you are updating the min count, right? Because
I would say, like, we should define clear semantic, and it's up to user, actually, like controller owner, right? Like, what is the intent there? What do you want to achieve, right? Whether you want to have atomic upscale or not, right? But I would leave like two options to, like, we can give some examples, like some recommendation, right, to control integrators, but in the end, that's their decision, because like, there might be different cases for different like business logic, etc., right? Needs. So yeah.
I completely agree.
I guess maybe the main thing for leader worker set, there is a new disaggregated leader worker set API, which might be more aligned there, but I haven't looked at it or anything. I don't know if anyone on this call has.
The thing that Antonio was looking and talking about, basically from disaggregated set, that's like one of the places where we got requirements for this hierarchical API, right? Where we need like more than just one level, because
Yeah, but still composite pod group will be formed for pod groups that probably would still benefit from having mutable min count, right? Even in this disaggregated serving. But this will be just
mutable
features.
Min group count, like that, basically.
That's the question, right? Because
I think it depends. Like I'm not sure we already have a decision like how we will be remodeling the individual replica of LWS.
But I just wanted to point out that with this separation of the APIs that we did, workload and pod group, right? Now, like one count is hidden because it's in the runtime layer, right? And so right now, even though pod group and workload is completely immutable, you could technically implement a simple LWS integration where we have runtime pod group, single template, pod group template, and a runtime pod group instance per LWS replica. And you can scale the number of replicas, right? Because it's a matter of creating and deleting objects, pod groups. So
yeah, I
mean,
guess
you can horizontally scale whole LWS, but you cannot vertically scale one.
But I would say that's the main use case. I think like usually what people do, they just scale horizontally. You rarely modify the size because as you explained the doc, I didn't know that it's actually disruptive operation, right? It recreates all the pods. So yeah. Anyway, like good discussion. I agree like with the approach. So anyone interested, like please take a look at the doc, comment, and hopefully we can like converge next meeting with decision here. But I also believe the decision is obvious, right? We just need to implement that. We need to unblock elastic jobs, and so I guess like this will be basically part of probably the cap for data promotion of the workload and pod group API. So
Andre?
Great.
Yeah, just a quick question, guys. Like, I remember like we also previously discussed about desire count API being introduced right to the pod groups. Did we do we see this kind of like related to the min count mutability?
So what is like the semantics for desired count in your
Yeah, I think I remember like one of the discussions we had before. One of the reasons for desired count is to tell scheduler what is kind of like it's like inform scheduler to which node to put the pods and what actually user expects from the scheduling kube scheduler to perform, right? Like for example, like I have 10 workers, and ideally I want 10 workers to be assigned, but I'm okay to start, with 5 workers with my job, right? But we can tell scheduler that, ideally I want to have 10 GPUs, which means like this is why I wanted to desire count, I guess, in addition to min count, right?
So like we discussed that in context of topology where it makes sense. So in your example, you should like set in that case min count to 5 because that's the minimum we want to have, right?
Yeah.
But want to inform scheduler that there will be like more pods in general. So when looking for placements, for example, racks, right? It should be looking for racks that can fit 10, right? And actually, there are like two separate problems here, I would say, right? Like one is to, or maybe in that case that is the one, but basically informing scheduler to expect that there will be 10 pods is like extra information, and we could have like a field like that in this case. Another is when there is no gang, so when there's like no min count, right? You want to have some kind of like best effort.
Yep, like a basic policy, right?
Then also like ideally need to somehow tell scheduler that all the pods are there. You can go with like placement generation, because otherwise it can just start selecting placement on like first pod appears, and it has no really way of telling that's the whole pod group, and then basically decision might be suboptimal. But the question is like whether that's a data blocker, but I think I don't think we agreed on that, right?
And yeah, so my question is why exactly we dropped that? Because it was initially in the topology-aware scheduling cap, right? You then considered it for 136, but we dropped it, and I do not.
So there was like a problem with implementation, and like so like for those two different cases, actually you could have like different solution. So if you just want to like wait, like somehow inform scheduler that all pods are created, then probably we could lose like different API. Right now, even you can like technically achieve that with some scheduling gates, right? But basically, that's an API. Yeah.
Yeah, I can like tell that there is indeed two different use cases.
Yeah.
Right. One is the potential future size of a group, and this is the desired, which eventually the scheduling should consider the desired size. And the second thing is actually this mutability. So once the podgroups are being created, they should not be scheduled until they reach the final form. And we don't have a way to tell scheduler that this creation process has been completed. But probably we'll have two different solutions for those two different problems. And we tried to actually address the solution, one with a API which is more suitable for the second. So
yeah,
that was the reason
that was the reason, because we were mixing those two use cases. And just to make it clear, so the first use case is basically like one way of solving that would be have some kind of information on the like additional field on the pod group that controller can use to indicate that I'm done with creating pods and now you can proceed with the scheduling algorithm. And the other, like there's still use case for desired count. Like another example is, for example, I want to have, I don't know, min count 10, but I will be doing rolling upgrade with search upgrade, so I will have like 2 more pods. So ideally, like desired count should be 12 because I should be looking for placement that will have place for 12 pods, right? The problem with that is we cannot really implement that in scheduler without having like homogeneous pod group and pod template there, right? Because or like some assumptions about like ideally like pod template, that would be easier, because then we have the information that those 2 extra pods or those n extra pods, we actually have like these requirements, and only then we can make like some scheduling decisions. So
so we think like, immutability of min count should come in parallel that discussion that, introduction of desired count, right? Because it can
yes, I think definitely like it should be like independent improvements here, or like
okay, because I would imagine desired count also might be immutable in the future, right?
I totally agree, right? But there's like many other things that are like helpful, or like we want to have, like we need to prioritize somehow. Like so, I think while min count is definitely a blocker for beta promotion, right? Because it's already existing. Introducing like new fields, I would probably like treat as a separate, I don't know, extensions or like caps or something like that. But like but then there is like a strong use cases for that, like examples where like in some the controllers, like you maintain.
No, I mean, I think definitely desired count will be optimal configuration we should have for the majority of ML related jobs, right? Because I mean, like even for the PyTorch, right? Like you usually specify min and max number of nodes, and you kind of know in advance if you use PyTorch Elastic, like how you want to place your workloads. Which means like if we can tell scheduler like, hey, like ideally I want to run my job on 10 GPUs, I would love controllers to tell this information to kubescaler, so kubescaler better make decisions right around where to place the workload. So I definitely see the use cases across training pretty much.
Okay.
So the question here.
Go ahead.
So do you think that the space should be reserved for the pods which are not there yet, or should it be completely best effort?
No, I think it should be best effort. I mean, like we should definitely talk about it more, but I think it should be best effort. I mean, maybe some folks from Q has more use cases on this. But again, like I think the whole idea of PyTorch Elastic is to make sure, like we can get more capacity if we get right from more GPU capacity back to the PyTorch job.
And are those pod dense homogeneous?
Yes.
So I think we are still like missing. Maybe we should consider adding it, pod group for homogeneous pods in which we could like
it's definitely part of
I think so.
Yeah, I would say, yeah.
On the inference side, however, like I think we should definitely talk about inference with disaggregated serving, right? Because I mean, you can definitely like require different node groups for prefill and decode stage, right? Which means they can be some sort of heterogeneous, right? And I'm not sure about how desired count work on those use cases. On the training side, usually they're homogeneous, right? Because you basically, you require your job to be co-located within the same rack.
Maybe so idea for desired count, I think it would work at the pod group level, right? In the definition that Antonio used. So pod group is basically a group of pods, and there we can have like a pod template and make this pod group homogeneous. Then like scheduler can make decision, and if you have like a more complex workload, that is basically a tree that you like schedule recursively. So it should work, but you will be expressing this desired count only at the bottom level, right? At the leaf level in this tree. Yeah. I know Dominic was saying something that Kevin has his hands.
Yeah, I only suggested that Andrei could maybe write some description, like what would be required or proposal, how it could be achieved, and we could discuss it to better understand the requirements.
Do we have a tracking though for this, like topology-aware scheduling for desired count, or not really? Okay.
I was just taking a look at the pod group min count mutability, and one thing maybe we were just talking about, I'm sorry, maybe it was mentioned, I was a little distracted, but for Q, we are getting quite a lot of requirements for mutating like topology aware scheduling requirements for like basically relocating workloads to different racks. I was wondering if the min, like, are we talking about mutability for just min count, or are we also thinking about like changing node labels or anything on the pod group level?
I mean, this doc was focused on min count, and I did not touch the mutability of other fields, but probably this is something that we should also consider. I'm not sure whether for 137 we want to dive deep into that.
I think we want, but like or I'm not sure if for 137 we want to make that possible, but that's a separate cap, Kevin, anyway. Like I think we were focused now on the primary workload / pod group cap to make it possible to target or graduate to beta. Like the schedule, like the topology constraints is like another, and it's a different cap anyway. So like we should have this discussion, but like as a separate thing, I would say.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, that makes sense to me. Yeah, I just was wondering if I should comment on the use cases for min count on this one, because I know that there's some work going on in Q and job set to kind of allow for different replicated jobs of a job set to start on different like node pools and to kind of trigger a suspension and a resume. So I know that work is at least being designed now. I don't know if people on the call are here though. So anyway, I'm also not as sure how far along that work is. It's on my backlog to review.
Yeah, I think I would love us to actually, think about job set kind of more complex workload than just a single entity, right? Because, like once we introduce this support of partial job admission by queue, the one that Kevin is talking about, I would imagine like, we build much more use cases when, within the job set, we have a multiple iteration within one job. It could be, as I mentioned, I think in one of the docs, like an initialization script, training script, maybe some post-evaluation or other part of, like of your workflow. So which means like, I think eventually we might require some mutability on the different fields, right?
Yeah, I think I'm hoping to find somebody. I'm making sure I'm going to follow up with some people that are still interested in doing the job set work once 1.36 is out. And then maybe we can start, like once we have the actual code and design, we can start figuring out those other use cases. I'm okay if the pod group min count is blocking the elastic index job, and I think it's okay to target this. I like that plan. I guess we just want to make sure to keep it in mind that other fields in the pod template might be made mutable also. But I think it sounds like we're all aligned. So cool.
I think I have maybe just one question on mutability. Then it looks like, so we want to use mutability for pod group template and the pod group, right? So which means like the expectation is when we modify the min count in the pod group template, it is not taking place in the already running pod groups, right?
Yes,
that is correct.
Okay. Does it mean that controllers will be responsible to remove the pod group, running pod groups?
In what case? Like,
so let's say we have an index jobs, right? Elastic index jobs, and we want to modify the parallelism of these elastic index jobs. So what controller should do? Like, should it delete the running pod group?
So you cannot really delete the pod group in non-disruptive way, right? Because in the pod spec, the scheduling group reference is immutable, and we wanted to have it this way, right? So like if you delete the pod group with aim to create a new one, then you also need to delete the pods and create new ones, right? So and that's why we're actually making the min count mutable, so you can just update the min count and add or delete pods, whatever you want to achieve.
Yeah.
And like the difference between like template and the pod group is that template is the long existing intent. Like for job is a bit, I would say, redundant. Like it's too much, but it works well for like more complex workloads, right? For job, probably the only reasonable use case to have template is like suspension. But like, for example, for job set is actually much better, right? We have replicated job with a single template for a job, right? And basically the template tells you when I will be creating new pod groups, so new job replicas, what is the template I should use for the scheduling policies, right? So for example, for min count. And now like the updating the min count in pod group and template has like different semantics, right? Because for template, you're actually affecting the new replicas that will be created after that, right? And you are not changing the existing replicas. And for existing replicas, you have a corresponding pod group objects where you can update. So
yeah, so I guess the problem with this approach, what if user wants to understand from which pod group template the pod group has been created? Because we don't really have a snapshot of the pod group template, right?
The pod group has the pod group template reference, right? Field.
Yeah, but it is not a snapshot. So like the problem is like what I'm talking about. Like imagine like in the future if introduce more mutability to the pod group templates. Like you can basically like user cannot really understand from which pod group template it was inherited, right? So did we have any discussion around this? Like how we?
That's a valid point, but the question is like whether we need snapshotting here, right? Like it's actually up to user intent or like controller intent here whether like they want to keep the pod groups and template in sync or not, right? In like it depends on the use case. Like I think both of them might be reasonable. Maybe you just want to change min count, for example, in this replicated job just for new jobs, and that's reasonable to keep the old as they were. Or you're using some other like scaling, HPA, right? And it can like auto scale the jobs, stuff like that. I don't know. So then obviously like the template will differ from the actual running instances of pod groups, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, for Elastic Index jobs, the goal was to auto scale without disrupting existing pods. So I think what we're saying is in that case, we don't want to delete all the, I mean, I think like if we delete the pods, we should clean up the pod group. But if we want to leave the pods running, it sounds like we want to update the pod min count in place.
Yes, and I think even in the implementation that we have right now for alpha, do we even create the workload for a simple Elastic job? I think we only create pod group, or do we create
I don't
also?
think we.
Yeah. Like we don't support Elastic jobs, right? But that's
yeah, yeah, I think.
But for jobs, yeah, go ahead. So we create both workload and pod group in the job integration right now. So yeah.
And I think in validation, we forbid updates so people can't change parallelism or completions if you are an index job. So we are effectively turning off Elastic Index job right now. But that's why it's a beta blocker.
But what do we do in suspension? Do we delete the pod groups?
I don't think we do. I think that is another beta item.
Mm-hmm. Because I guess like the deadlock we face right now is like when we do suspended the elastic index jobs, right, and then recreate it, and if the mean count is not equal to the parallelism, we hit this deadlock, right?
So like suspension is probably a different topic and discussion that we need to have. To be honest,
sorry, I can answer that one. It's not suspension. It's more it's more about preemption. I mean, suspension can be one case, but you can also reproduce this problem if your pods in your job get deleted and then somebody changes the parallel. They can't change the parallelism or completions, but it doesn't have to be suspend. There's no requirement that you can change suspended. Like parallelism and completions can be changed regardless of whether or not the job is suspended or not.
Mm-hmm. But the pod groups, I mean, it only take effect when the job is scheduled, right? To place the gang to the appropriate non-groups,
only
right?
when there are like some pods to be scheduled. Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, which means like, when job is already running, it doesn't really matter which mean count I have on the pod group. I can, like scale up and down. Like if
like when it's already running and like there are like no pending pods, then yes, right? But when a new pending pod appears, like the policy from the pod group is actually what matters. So that way it's important because it doesn't really matter where we only consider the happy scenario. I create a job, pods are created, scheduled, and that's the end of the story, right? But we need to consider like some disruptions in the systems, like node going down, some pods being deleted, stuff like that, and making sure we don't end up in deadlocks, right? Because and you can easily have there are like examples in the doc that Maciej described where basically this can deadlock if the mean count doesn't matches the parallelism.
Mm-hmm. So basically, yeah, but like when all of the pods like for some reason get deleted, right? Like the scheduler will check the mean count right before placing them right back to the control plane. So this is what
if
happens.
If they get like deleted and recreated, then yes, we'll go again through the pod group scheduling cycle, and we'll be looking at the mean count, right? So,
okay.
For example, if the mean count was not updated, but the parallelism was changed to 5 in this example, right? 10 and 5 was reduced. Then, if for some reason some pods were deleted and recreated, right, it would deadlock because the scheduler will be waiting for 10 pods. That's why it's important to like update this parameter. Yeah.
So I guess like the immutability of pod group template, I guess like as you mentioned, might be useful when you have more complex workloads, right?
I guess so. Like for job it's as I said, probably only suspension is the only use case. Assuming like in suspension we'll delete the pod group, but the template will.
Yeah, makes sense.
We'll keep the workup but delete the pod group. So, but it's also a very artificial example because you could easily like work around this, right, and just create a new pod group from the information you have in a job spec. But yeah. But definitely there is like a value when you have like more.
I'm wondering if we want to do it both together or we want to separate this by, 2 cycles, like mutability of template and mutability of pod group.
So I guess we need to be able to API needs to support both, right? And it's actually a question to controller integrator, like how they want to do that. I would argue that you should update both usually, right? Unless there is like a different, maybe not, like it depends, right? Because the job set was a good example. It depends like what you want to achieve, right? What is the use case? But anyway, like that's a separate discussion, right? Like what controllers we do, probably more in the controller integration track. No matter what they decide, we need to make this API on the pod group workload mutable, right? Yeah. All right. Do we have any other topics?
I guess so. For the min count, I forgot the person's name that's leading that. Have we reached out or have we followed up with the Ray community on what they need?
Maciej,
yeah, I was commenting on the some Ray document, but I did not link the min count mutability to them, so I will do that.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, imagine their use cases are fun. I know at KubeCon we did talk a little bit with the Spark folks, but I don't know if I have a contact of anyone that can help on Spark.
I do, but I still haven't reached out to them. I just still like catching up after the KubeCon, but I have it on my to-do list, so to reach out to them and like discuss. So yeah.
Yeah, so actually we hold a meeting on Friday. So if you guys are interested, I can ask Vara and other folks from my AWS team, and I guess the person who drive the queue integration, maybe we can talk about Spark, because I think Spark dynamic allocation is definitely something we should, be thinking on. But Spark application, at least on the Kubeflow side, they don't use job set today. So they're just creating pods directly. As far as I know, the Apache Spark, they do the same there.
Yeah, I think the Spark one is pretty early stages. I think we have to probably more seriously consider it as a community anyway. I guess given, I feel like it's not been in a, with Spark just going in the queue, I think we're more aware of some of the limitations of the current Spark setup on Kubernetes, but we'll figure it all out.
Yeah, so I have like a limited number. Definitely can reach out to folks, but the driver is actually responsible to decide what you should do into executors scheduling decisions, right? How you can scale up or scale down the executor nodes based on the resource availability.
I mean, I think it's probably very similar to other reasons. I think more of my concern would be like staffing on this and figuring out who's will actually work on it. Because there's not really. I mean, I know Kubeflow has a Spark operator. My hope is we drive more people to that, so we can start as a community having people support one operator. Then, every company kind of doing their own thing, which is sort of where we are with Spark. So that's kind of why it's a little early stages.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, if you're interesting, again, we hold these community calls on Friday, so we can definitely talk about VAS and other integrations on the Spark side.
Yeah, if this is this Friday, I definitely won't be able to join because I'm out of office. But you can share the invite. So I will also reach out to the people I discussed this during KubeCon, and probably I can attend maybe live meetings, so we can discuss it there. All right.
I have just maybe one question, man. We have a separate discussion around workload integration.
Yeah, for the API, I need to move it forward. Yeah, it's on my burner currently, but yes.
So we want to do it before 136, right? 137.
So ideally, I would like to introduce some of the building blocks in 137, but I think the design is still not complete. It's missing a full story. So that's what I hopefully will be working on this week, maybe second part of the week, and yeah. But yes, because I strongly believe we need that, because that's the way to actually consume the WAS API, WAS features, right? Topology, disruption, whatever. And without that, it will be really, I don't want to say pointless, but yeah, we are designing really nice abstractions here, but as long as customers are not using them, then there's limited value. And I don't see other way, for example, to do topology without having an API like that. But yeah, thanks for the comments. They are really helpful with real examples from TrainJob and other controllers. So yeah, I will aim to share new revision next week, and I will let you know once it's ready. All right. So if that's it, then I believe we can save 5 minutes. All right. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. See ya.